Hey, AP Psych students, this is Mrs. Sewell. For those of you that don't know me, I'm going to do a quick states of consciousness review to help you prepare for your test. So here we go. Let's take a look at standard one. Whoops, I went too fast. What is consciousness? Be sure that you know what consciousness is. That is our awareness of ourselves. It's our feelings, our thoughts, our sensation, and it's also our awareness of our environment, okay? People to know for consciousness. James, remember we talked about him being the states of consciousness person, and he believed that consciousness was like a river, like a stream, and so your thoughts just flow in and out of our awareness, okay? So that's the idea of stream of consciousness, all right? Freud is another figure. Remember, he studied the unconscious mind, and he believed that the unconscious mind had a lot of effect on our behavior. This is the whole psychoanalytic approach, that there's a whole bunch going on in our unconscious, and of course, it's unconscious, so we're not aware of it, all right? Let's see, what else for states of consciousness? Altered states of consciousness. I don't know why this is so weird, but we have spontaneous altered states. So when you drift into daydreaming, that's an altered state of consciousness. Drowsiness and dreaming, all are altered states of consciousness. Sometimes your consciousness can be altered by physiological issues. Maybe you're suffering from hallucinations. Deprivation of food and oxygen can cause a physiological induced altered state of consciousness, and taking drugs, okay, psychoactive drugs, which we talked about with standard 3. Psychologically induced sensory deprivation. So like if you're in a sensory deprivation tank where it's just, you floating in water in the darkness. Hypnosis can be a psychologically induced altered state of consciousness, and meditation. So if you meditate, you probably didn't realize you were altering your consciousness, okay? So if you know those things, standard 1 is pretty easy. Hopefully you've done the reading, and then make sure you've done that, and then you should be good, okay, on standard 1. Standard 2 is sleep. You got a great chart, use it. You have an open note test. Just remember in NREM 1 sleep, that's when we're falling asleep. We're shifting from being awake and relaxed, those alpha waves, into being asleep, down into those theta waves. And so we'll make that shift, all right? During that, we may experience these things called hypnagogic sensations or hypnagogic jerks. So we might have the sensation that we're falling, we're floating, some people spin. And so you have that sensation as you're drifting into sleep. Sometimes you have a jerk, your arm jerks, or your leg jerks. And so those are all associated with NREM 1, okay? NREM 1, falling asleep. You don't spend very much of your night there because you don't fall asleep again, unless you wake back up and then you fall asleep and you hit NREM 1. All right, NREM 2, nothing really happens in NREM 2 that you have to worry about. The waves are the theta waves, but on the EEG, they'll see these bursts of activities called sleep spindles. And so be aware that sleep spindles happen in NREM 2. In NREM 3, delta waves, that's something that could definitely be tested. Those waves are the important ones. This is where we get the deep sleep, where it's really hard to rouse us during this sleep. You see behaviors, sleep behaviors. If it's a behavior, it's going to happen in NREM 3. So if you walk, you talk, or you scream, night terrors, then that is all the behavior, and that's going to happen in that deep sleep. People that get deep sleep and stay there for a while, they'll do those things, okay? So the older you get, it's unlikely that you sleepwalk, sleep talk, and have night terrors as an adult. You can, but that's unusual, and that may indicate a sleep disorder. And remember, your NREM 3 happens early in the night. As the night wears on, you stop going, cycling down to NREM 3, and you'll just cycle mostly between NREM 2 and REM sleep, okay? So the first half of the night, you're going to spend more time in NREM 3. REM sleep, that's rapid eye movement. Remember, the NREM is non-rapid eye movement. I should have said that earlier. In this stage, we call it paradoxical sleep. And the paradox is that you're asleep, but when they look at the EEG and look at your brain waves, it looks like you're awake, all right? That's the paradox, all right? That's why it's called paradoxical sleep. This is the stage where you dream, where you can see the people's eyes move behind their lids. while we dream, we'll experience sleep paralysis. And so our brainstem actually just kind of paralyzes us. So we're not flailing and punching and kicking the wall. We saw people with some REM disorders in the Sanjay Gupta video. All right. As you get closer to waking up time, so as the night wears on, you're going to spend more time in REM sleep. Okay. And this is where you're going to have dreams that you remember, of course. Nightmares too. Nightmares are just scary dreams. Okay. So if it says nightmares, it's just a scary dream. Remember with the paradoxical sleep on the EEG, you're going to see those beta waves. Beta waves are the same waves we see when we're awake and alert. So you still experience that same kind of level of brain activity in REM sleep. Okay. So your brain is very active at that point. All right. Also, don't forget, you can see on the test circadian rhythms. That's our biological clock. If we miss sleep, we'll upset our circadian rhythms when we have daylight savings times, when we travel across time zones, those kind of things will disrupt our circadian rhythms. Suprachiasmatic nucleus, that is that clump of cells in the hypothalamus that helps regulate your pineal gland. Your pineal gland is the gland in your endocrine system that releases melatonin. Melatonin is a naturally occurring substance in our system that will help us sleep. Okay, you can get melatonin that's manufactured. Some people use that to sleep as well, but our body makes its own melatonin. And the pineal gland and the suprachiasmatic nucleus, it operates based on light. And so as light hits the retina, the suprachiasmatic will tell the pineal gland to cut back on producing melatonin. If it's dark, the suprachiasmatic nucleus will tell the pineal gland to release more melatonin. Okay, so light plays into that issue with the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It sits at the back of the retina, kind of. So let's see. Remember that you also have 90-minute sleep cycles. That often appears on the test. Okay. All right. So that's the basis of sleep. You got that good chart. Look it over. Use it. You should kill it on standard 2 with that chart. You're lucky you get an open note test. All right. Sleep disorders. All right. You got to know your sleep disorders. Students confuse these all the time. I'm not sure why, and I don't know how to make you not confuse them. Narcolepsy. Remember Rusty the dog? He'd run and then boop, he'd fall over asleep. He had narcolepsy, and that is a sudden, uncontrollable sleep attack. Somebody that suffers from narcolepsy just falls asleep at random times. They could be driving, they could be walking, they could be talking, and they're out. When someone has narcolepsy, the kind of sleep they go into is REM sleep. All right. One way to treat narcolepsy is to use stimulants. Okay. So stimulants, they get your system going. And so they're used to often treat narcolepsy because you don't want to sleep. Insomnia, you want to sleep, right? Because if you suffer from insomnia, you can't get to sleep or you can't stay asleep. All right. The way to treat that is reduce or eliminate your caffeine. If you exercise, sometimes they'll use barbiturates. So we talked about these psychoactive drugs. Barbiturates, sleeping pills, tranquilizers, those are used to treat insomnia, okay? But they you become dependent on them pretty easily. Sleep apnea is where you stop breathing, okay? So during your sleep, you hear this gasp for air. This happens when people are really loud snorers. They're often overweight and they're tired all the time. Okay, that is sleep apnea. All right, and then you've got your NREM3 disorders. We talked about that. If you see behaviors happening during sleep, that's going to be NREM3. So sleepwalking, sleep talking, and the screaming and panic associated with night terrors, that is an NREM3 disorder. Right? And then you've got your nightmares, okay? Nightmares are just scary dreams and they happen in your REM sleep. So that's different than a night terror, okay? Night terror suffered by children happens when they're in that NREM3. It's an NREM3 disorder. Unlikely that adults over 40 would experience night terrors. All right, then we've got our dream theories. Just know, you gotta know the difference between manifest content and latent content. That's part of Freud's wish fulfillment. Freud believed that we repressed a lot of our desires, usually sexual in his book, into our unconscious, and that in our dreams, these desires can come out. And so, that's why it's called wish fulfillment. So we can, think about the things we want to think about, that our unconscious, we've pressed into our unconscious. He believed that each of our dreams has a storyline with manifest content. That's the obvious content. Okay. So, like I said in my classes, if you see an elephant in your dreams, it's an elephant. That's the manifest content. It is what it is. All right. But he believed that the manifest content had also a symbolic meaning or a hidden meaning. That's the latent content. Latent content are subject to interpretation. So your psychoanalyst would say, well, um, that elephant is not just an elephant. It symbolizes, your huge desires or something like that. Okay. So that is the difference. Know the difference between manifest and latent content. Information processing model, that's all about memory. Okay. So if you see memory and, dream theory, it is going to be information processing. And it's the idea that during our sleep that, we're processing information from our day and we're storing it, we're sifting through it, sorting it, and filing it away. And it's helping us with our memory. Okay. And that's one of the theories why we need lots of REM sleep, and that helps our memory and learning. Okay. The last one is activation synthesis. Okay. This is the physiological one. I mean, we talked about physiological in class, but this is a biological issue. And that basically it just says that our brain stem is making, and especially as it ties into the limbic system, there's random neural activity going on in the brain. And it seems to be a lot from the amygdala and the limbic system, and that our brain is just trying to make sense of this neural firing, this random neural activity, and it creates kind of storylines. And so activation synthesis theorists would say, dreams have no meaning. It's just, interpretations of random activity. Okay. So that's more of a biological approach. Okay. And you can kind of see information processing, that's going to be more cognitive. Wish fulfillment, of course, is psychoanalytic. Wish fulfillment, not really used anymore. Okay. All right, next thing you got to do is, this is the last thing we studied, psychoactive drugs. A psychoactive drug, know the categories: depressant, stimulus, and hallucinogens, and then know the what they do. So depressants, I always say they slow you down. They lower your neural activity, so there's less brain activity, and your body's functioning slows down. Know what are depressants. Alcohol is a depressant. Barbiturates, they're called downers, and tranquilizers, sedatives, those kind of things are all going to fall under depressants. Know your opiates, and opiates depress your pain. That's what I like to say. They act like endorphins in your body. It's very common for the AP College Board to ask you that. Opiates look like endorphins, and endorphins are naturally occurring neurotransmitters that are pain relievers, and they kind of give us a sense of euphoria. You get that with runner's high. All right, know your opiates: heroin, morphine, opium, OxyContin, any of the oxys. Those are opiates. They come from the poppy flower. Know your stimulants. Okay, these speed you up. Depressants slow you down. Stimulants speed you up, and they will speed up your neural functioning. So you've got more neural activity in your body functioning. Caffeine and nicotine. Remember, nicotine is the most addictive. Cocaine creates a dopamine dependency. It is going to flood your system with dopamine, and then you're going to keep wanting it. You're going to crash, and then you're going to have cravings. Cravings usually are only caffeine. No amphetamines and are also stimulants, and methamphetamines are just a form of amphetamine that's been processed in a slightly different way. Ecstasy, MDMA, is the abbreviation for ecstasy. It is some long thing with methamphetamine at the end. MDMA, ecstasy, acts as both a stimulant because it speeds you up, but it also acts as a hallucinogen because it distorts reality. Then you've got your hallucinogens. I'm running out of time. They create some kind of hallucination and distort your perception of reality. LSD is probably the most famous hallucinogen, but they like to ask you about marijuana or cannabis. They may call it cannabis. The THC in marijuana is considered a hallucinogen, and so it can give you some hallucinations in large quantities, and it can distort your perception of time, and so that's going to qualify as a hallucinogen. And know the definition of psychoactive drug. It alters your perception and mood. Know the difference between tolerance You get used to a drug and then it takes more of it to have the same effect. Withdrawal, that's when you have physical symptoms when you stop the drug. And there are physiological